everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Can we ever truly be prepared for the horrors that lie in wait? As children, we're told to stand tall in defiance against the monsters under our bed and the specters that haunt our dreams. And as adults, we can brace ourselves for the obvious terrors. But horror, my friends, comes in all shapes and sizes. It can be found within the mundane, sneaking into our lives in unsuspecting ways. So what happens when we bear witness to something truly terrifying? Whether it's something that goes against all logic, or just something so immeasurably rare or horrific, our minds struggle to process the unfathomable, or the things that defy rationality. Usually these experiences are unforgettable. Maybe it's the fear. It lingers, seeping into our consciousness, sometimes forever altering the way we see the world. We can arm ourselves with knowledge, believe we're ready for whatever horrors may come our way, but the truth is, we can never be completely prepared because the unknown will always possess the power to shock us. So, let's get started, shall we? Last week, my grandmother died. It wasn't unexpected, but yeah, there was still all the usual stuff to deal with. I come from a big family and most of us live out of town, so that meant that everyone wanted to stay at Grandma's. Except guess what? We're also poor. Granny's house is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. It's been converted into a 3-bedroom by giving up the dining room. Granny had 3 boys, and those boys had a bunch of kids who were all grown now with kids of their own, myself being one of them. Tons of people were at this house, and I was planning to be in town for 3 nights. There's no way I was going to stay there, even without my partner, who stayed home to feed the cats. The best solution seemed like an Airbnb, so I found one 10 minutes from Grandma's and booked it. A little context before I get to the next part. This is a small town. Everybody knows everybody. It's also a historically famous town, so they get lots of tourists there. Lastly, I've changed my last name since moving away, and very few people outside of my family know about it. I could have been anyone renting this place. Alright, so this house was in a neighborhood that I know very well. It's part of the reason I picked it. Several of my friends had lived on those streets, and I wanted to drive through just for nostalgia. I hadn't recognized the house's pictures because it had been painted since my time in high school. But once I actually got there, it started to seem very familiar. I just couldn't place why. I was late for dinner with my family and didn't have long to dwell on it until I returned later that night. I'd hoped to go straight to bed since I had to be up early, but I doubt I got more than a couple of hours. Every time I fell asleep, I'd wake up to the sound of something moving around in the walls. I'm plenty accustomed to sharing my houses with the local wildlife, but this sounded like a whole family of raccoons were in a territory war with some possums. I'm not a pleasant person when I'm sleepy. Around 3 a.m., I lost my temper, got out of bed, and began banging on the walls while screaming, "If you make one more sound, I swear to Christ I'll rip open this wall and drag you out by the tails." I was crying. My voice was cracking. I looked like a complete lunatic. It wasn't my proudest moment, but strangely enough, it worked. There wasn't another peep for the entire night. That should have been another clear red flag, but I was so tired, I didn't even question it. The next morning, I was so exhausted I didn't even shower. I just went back to Granny's and got to work. One of my cousins is the same age as me, and another is only 2 years younger. So the 3 of us were particularly close growing up. Jennifer's husband stayed behind with their toddler, and Jake enjoys being single too much to ever settle down, so they were also flying solo. We were all talking and cleaning out the hallway closet. They complained about sleeping on the couches and never being able to get into the bathroom, and I complained about the weird noises that kept me up half the night. One thing led to another, and we decided that they would stay with me for the last 2 nights. The house I rented had 2 bedrooms and bathrooms anyway. If I could take a little pressure off everyone staying at Granny's, why not? That night I pulled into the driveway, turned off the car, and just as I was opening my door, Jake started freaking out. He asked me if I was messing with him at least 10 times, and when he realized I was serious, he got mad. I hadn't seen him that angry since we were kids. Then he pulled out a gun from his bag, got my keys, and told us to wait in the car. We definitely should have listened, but we didn't. We followed him inside and straight to the master bedroom. He was so upset, I don't think he even noticed us. He didn't say a word until he got to the closet doors. Then he ripped them open and began yelling for Brendon to come out, or he was going to start shooting into the wall. Jennifer and I were shocked into silence at this point, but then we heard footsteps. They started directly behind the bed and continued around to the closet, where a greasy, disgusting man suddenly appeared from behind a hidden door. I recognized him instantly. He was the creepy kid we went to school with, and we were in his mother's old house. She passed away several years ago, and it was left to Brendon. He had never had much success with women, so he decided to try his luck with Airbnb. Apparently, he only rented to young women traveling alone. Anyone else was turned away. There were also hidden cameras all over the place, including the bathroom. Thank goodness I didn't shower. Brendon was so proud of his setup that he bragged about it to a few friends, and small town life being what it is, Jake had heard about what that weird kid had ended up doing, but it didn't occur to him to report it until it affected someone he knew. Obviously, things could have been handled better, but I'm just glad no one else will fall victim to this guy. The property's banned from Airbnb, and we were able to provide the police with enough evidence to get a search warrant for his computers. The worst thing he caught me doing on camera was changing clothes and threatening to tear open the walls during my 3 a.m. freakout. But that's all been deleted now. Well, except for what the police needed to keep as evidence. I don't expect Brendon will serve any time over this, but I hope he's had enough trouble that it'll make him think twice before he tries anything like this again. The whole town knows about it too, so he can't fly invisibly under the radar anymore either. Overall, it could have been much worse. So I'm just thankful for bringing Jake and Jennifer back with me that night, even if it did mean sharing Granny's house for the remainder of our stay. I'm a 20-year-old female and I just started my junior year of college. I've been listening to your channel for a couple of months now, but I didn't realize the stories came from your listeners until last week's episode. So when this crazy thing happened last night, I knew I wanted to send it in. I'm sorry it isn't more traditionally frightening, but I swear it's true. I tried to debunk it in every way that I could think of, but I just can't explain this. Now, you might be mistakenly thinking that I'm almost finished with school, but I'm a psych major here on a scholarship, so I still have a long road ahead of me. The bulk of my time is currently spent going to class, working in the cafeteria, and studying. I even study while I eat, and the only thing that gets me through it is listening to scary stories. I've always felt like a little bit of a psycho when saying that, but I think the people here will understand what I mean. That's why this is my kind of crowd. I know this all sounds like a long introduction, but I swear it's relevant. I need you to understand that YouTube is my main source of entertainment. I'm not some boomer who's confused by technology. I'm telling you, something weird happened last night. My roommate was out and I was up late studying, close to midnight or shortly after. With a YouTube playlist loaded on my Chromebook. It had been playing with no trouble for over 3 hours, and the current video had just ended. I'm too poor for YouTube Premium, so I have to deal with pressing skip ad occasionally. It's normally not worth mentioning, but this time, the second I pressed it, a female voice screamed, "Get out," loud enough to make me fall out of my seat. That part I'm certain of. The part I'm slightly less sure of is what I think I saw as I was falling. It looked an awful lot like a pale, transparent face had appeared on the screen. From the extremely brief glimpse I got, it looked feminine, but her eyes were missing. Or maybe they were just black. I can't be sure which. Either way, when I pulled myself off the floor, there was only my desktop screen. YouTube had crashed. Then, just as I got my playlist pulled up again, the closet door to my right slammed shut. It had been wide open. There was no draft, and it's never done that before or since. Just randomly closed all by itself. No, not closed. Slammed. I've not only never experienced anything paranormal in that dorm room, I've never experienced anything paranormal in my life. At first, I thought a second ad had started to play and then glitched. I searched on YouTube and Google, but I couldn't find any images or audio that were even close to what I heard. Next, I thought it was a prank, that I clicked a fishy link and now someone had the ability to screw with me. My brother is a computer engineer, and I may have made my story sound slightly more urgent to attain speedier service. I know, I'm an asshole, but I couldn't stand the idea of waiting. It didn't matter anyway. Eric returned my Chromebook with a clean bill of health. His best explanation for my experience is a stress-induced hallucination. I'm sorry, I just don't buy it. I don't think I could accept that even if the closet door hadn't slammed shut almost immediately after. I don't really mind the door or the voice as much as I do the face. That thing haunts me. I swear those eyes were blank sockets. I'm going to try to find out if anyone has ever died in my building, but I'm afraid to tell my friends about this. They're all psych majors as well, and I'm torturing myself enough in that department as it is. I really don't need them piling on. Half of me thinks I must be cracking, while the other half knows what I saw. It's maddening. Anyway, I'll send an update if anything new happens, or if I learn that some girl's eyes were brutally removed in my room. Meanwhile, thanks for reading my story. Good evening, all. My name is Corey, and I thank you in advance for stopping by to hear my humble words of warning. I'm a 31-year-old male, 6'2", and I weigh almost 300 pounds. Okay, I'm a really big dude. We need to get that established up front because it's a relevant part of the story. People have been giving me shit for my size for as long as I can remember, so I learned how to deal with assholes very early in life. And since I'm always so much bigger than they are, I'm used to doing just about whatever I feel like doing to them. Assholes make that mistake a lot. They think that just because a fella enjoys good food, he must be simple. Well, I'm many things, but simple ain't one of them. And I resent the assumption something fierce. All through my childhood, other kids would try to trick me into embarrassing myself. But I never fell for their bullshit. Mama raised a glutton, not a fool. And you'll do well to remember there's a difference. So would I, for that matter. I'm also guilty of making dangerous assumptions. Until a few weeks ago, I assumed anyone who tried to mess with me was a harmless punk. I behaved like my size made me invincible. But that was as naive as the imbeciles I'm sitting here making fun of. I currently live in Georgia, but my family is back in Tennessee. Before my visit in August, I hadn't seen my parents in over a year, so I made the trip out to be with them during my birthday week. We had a great bunch of days together, and I left at 10 on a Thursday night in hopes of avoiding any heavy traffic. The drive is only 4 hours, but my back usually starts hurting in half that time, so I always stop at the same rest area to stretch my legs. and use the bathroom. Big guy, tiny bladder, that's how it works. Anyway, this rest area is right at the trio's halfway point. It's not the most well-lit or the nicest of places to stop late at night, but it doesn't scream death trap either. I'd been there at least 5 or 6 times before, and I didn't even see another vehicle on those occasions. Then again, I didn't see one during this visit, so I guess that's not saying very much. I pulled into the empty parking lot at 1:15 midnight and parked right in front of the bathrooms. There was a sign in the center of the small building that indicated men went left and women went right. Each side had a short hallway before turning into the actual bathroom, but I could see from where I stood that the men's light was flickering on and off. I didn't like that, so I decided there was no harm in using the women's. On the off chance that anyone pulled up, I would apologize like crazy and make a quick exit. I only made it a few steps into the actual bathroom part before some deranged guy in a clown costume leapt out of the first stall and gave me the jump scare of my life. He was holding a large knife, had a curly lime green wig, a huge red nose, white gloves, and a green and yellow polka dot jumpsuit that looked like it was part of a Halloween costume. It had orange fuzzy balls around the neck, wrists, and ankles, but he also had a cheap pair of devil horns over his wig, and his makeup looked more like it was for Darth Maul than a clown. Overall, I wasn't impressed as far as costume design. He couldn't have been more than 18, 19. Even through all the gunk on his face, he still just looked like a stupid kid. Once I calmed down from the sudden shock of it all, I was instantly furious. I thought all this clown nonsense had ended years ago. I couldn't believe some idiot was out here still doing that garbage. Plus, he was clearly trying to target women and take it who knows how far. I wasn't about to let him get away with that. At about this same time, his giddy, triumphant laughter was fading into confusion. I could see the gears turning in his tiny brain as he registered the fact that I was not a woman. I was a very large man. I was aware of his knife, but I really didn't believe that he would try to use it on me. I thought he would be like all the other bullies who backed down at the first sign of resistance. I didn't want to hurt him. I just wanted to scare him badly enough to make sure that he didn't try to do this to anyone else. Hell, as I began moving towards him, I was thinking how lucky he was that I wasn't some lunatic with a gun. How I'd probably save his life by putting the fear of God into him while he was still young. Sweet irony. I put on the scariest face I could make and I ran at him, never taking my eyes off that knife until it fell from his terrified hand with a satisfying clink. His face went from menacing psychopath to petrified child in less than a second, and I was so pleased with myself that I forgot to watch his hands. He began backing away from me, pleading. It was only a joke. He didn't mean any harm. He was just having a little fun. The way his voice squeaked, I began to worry that he was even younger than I thought. But then there was a deafening bang that made my head pound, and I could feel the echo vibrating in my clenched teeth. I stopped dead in my tracks, hands shooting to my ears, and that's when I saw the kid's hands had gone to his ears as well, only now he was suddenly holding a gun. I had no clue how it got there, but I was so surprised that it took me several more seconds to realize it had caused the bang. It wasn't until the ringing stopped and I could hear the kid talking that the pieces fell into place. Well, actually he was crying, apologizing, and begging me to leave him alone. He kept saying it was an accident, that he didn't know it was loaded. Then I noticed he was staring at my feet and looked down. There was a mark on the concrete where the bullet hit, and the ricochet grazed my leg. There was a good amount of blood there, so the kid thought that he shot me. Hell, I did at first glance, but I only needed a few stitches. Basically, I was really, really lucky. Me and that kid could have lost our lives that night. I think we both needed to learn a lesson. Just remember, folks, you gotta be careful with people. Even when they're not crazy, They're downright careless. It doesn't take malice to make a murderer. Any dumbass can kill somebody. Growing up, my family's property in Michigan sat against vast woods. My parents would speak of strange occurrences, unsettling stories that they'd heard about the woods. Things like people's pets going missing, seemingly vanishing into thin air, in good numbers too. Stories of brave men being chased off their own property. My dad said that he could see the terror in the men's eyes as they recounted their encounters with a creature that they referred to as the Dog Man. Were they just stories to scare me and my friends? Not likely. These trees hold secrets. Or, hear the whispers of the leaves? That's Mother Nature. These are things that my mom would say. She was sort of that way, easygoing, if you will, nature type, be kind to earth, that type of thing. My dad, on the other hand, he had his own feelings about the woods. Not all the woods, just ours. He didn't go out there much, and even kept a loaded shotgun nearby whenever we were outside, especially at night. All these precautions I didn't fully understand until later, but regardless, these woods were both a playground and an enigma. The towering trees created a sanctuary, often filled with birds and squirrels, a scurrying deer here and there. Go a bit deeper and you'll find black bears, wolves, and the mammoth of them all, the moose. Most of these animals are more or less wary of people. It usually takes going into their space to see them. All in all, the woods felt inviting during the day. Nightfall, however, it brought a symphony of both terrifying and unsettling sounds. Howls through the silence, echoing, accompanied by rustling branches, crunching leaves, all creating some sort of haunting melody, one that's hard to ignore, especially after this night. This story is about my first and only encounter. The night childhood innocence collided head-on with the uncanny. My friends and I were sitting around a fire that had been lit for likely hours. We'd been sharing laughter and harmless banter, unaware of the horrors that awaited us that night. My parents' house stood just a few paces away from the fire pit. And I recall a couple of times that night my dad asking us what all the yelling was about. Just being loud kids. As we exchanged stories of crushes and making fun of one another for those very crushes, our joyous night took an unexpected turn. Without warning, my dog, Tato, darted away from our spot and toward the woods. This was highly unusual, as Tato was typically obedient and seldom strayed far from my side. As Tato charged towards the looming woods, tail raised high in a defensive stance, I felt a legitimate wave of fear wash over me. One of my friends, unfazed by the dangers that potentially lurked in the woods, playfully dashed after Tato, imitating his movements in a foolish attempt to coax him back. Concern had officially gripped me, and I too sprinted toward the woods in an attempt to prevent either of them from going too far. As I reached the edge of the woods, my stomach twisted in a knot. Tato's growls were laced with both defiance and terror. He had entered the woods, and though dark, I could still see him, holding that defensive stance. I told my friend to stay back, only he laughed this off. He passed me and stood next to Tato, innocently requesting that he come back, that he leave it, whatever it was. Drawing closer, I saw something that surely defied all logic. Amid the darkness, in front of us but further back, stood a creature like none I'd ever seen before. Its massive, brawn-like frame was covered in wiry black fur. My eyes widened, fixated on its stance. Upright. It stood as though it was a person, but the shape of its head, it wasn't human at all. but it was also like no wolf I'd ever seen, and certainly like no dog I'd ever seen. Suddenly, I realized it was looking in our direction, but its eyes, reflecting in the moonlight, they were an otherworldly red hue. I knew then and there I was face to face with the dogman. The realization hit me like a freight train, and terror surged through my veins. An ungodly scream erupted from my throat, almost involuntarily. Only when I stopped screaming had I realized my friend was screaming too. Sensing imminent danger, he turned to me with fear-stricken eyes I'd never seen, and I knew without words what we needed to do. "Run," I screamed, my voice trembling with urgency. Legs pumping, hearts pounding, we sprinted away from that creature, Tato eventually getting ahead of us and going straight for the back door. My other friend had been watching everything from the safety of the fire pit. But once we all ran right past him, he too started running. As we reached the safety of my parents' house, gasping for breath, I knew deep inside that my life had changed. The dogman had just basically entered my backyard. For the next hour, maybe two, my dad sat in a camping chair with a lantern and a shotgun in front of those woods. He didn't see it for himself, but I always knew he believed me. We didn't let Tato outside alone ever anymore. Couldn't risk him running off with one of us not around to see him. I wasn't going to let my dog become a local statistic. After that night, the terrifying image of that creature would forever remind me that there are many hidden horrors in the woods. And I've always felt I didn't need to explore the ones in the heart of Michigan. As an adult, I'm perfectly happy and content living in the heart of the city instead. Once while on holiday, I visited a place known as Bodmin Jail, which is known to be a very haunted prison. It was built a long time ago, and I actually felt the presence of spirits there. So did my mom and siblings. I know this is a short story, but as a fun bonus fact, they're turning the jail into an actual hotel. A lot of people died there. Why would anyone think that that's even a slightly good idea? My mom said that she was going to do something before we left to ensure that no spirits followed us home, but she never actually did it. Then, back at home, I started feeling like there was something in my bathtub. I'm pretty sure the spirit ended up attaching itself to me, and now taken residence in my bathroom. I wanted to share one of my stories. I may not have a bunch of fancy ghosts in my house, but if there's one thing I got in spades, it's crazy with a capital C. When it comes to my stories, I wasn't sure which one to tell, but the one that keeps coming to mind is from my short time working as a taxidermist. It was actually just my dad's old fishing buddy. Most of his work came from people bringing in their fish or deer, and Rick could do just about anything they wanted with them. One guy brought in a doe and a buck, saying he wanted to mount the buck, mounting the doe, so that's what we gave him. But that's just a fun bonus. It's not why we're actually here. The story I came to tell you happened a few months before this. It was my third day on the job, and I still had no clue what I was doing. I came in bright and early like a good new hire, and I was just in time to see an electric bone saw demonstration. I was actually excited. I thought there was a good chance that he was going to let me try it out, and I'm sure that he would have if we hadn't had to stop so suddenly. I know some people are squeamish about animals, and it couldn't be less relevant, so without mentioning that part, Rick had the saw in one hand, and he was holding back a flap of the material with the other. This is probably a good time to mention he was also a bit of a drunk. I could smell the alcohol on him the second I walked in, but he was also swimming in whiskey the previous 2 days, and nothing bad had happened. Who was I to tell him that he shouldn't work while intoxicated? If I had tried, he probably would have fired me before listening to me. While he was cutting, he was explaining how everything worked, but he kept turning back to look at me, like he wanted to make sure I was listening. That's when everything started going in slow motion. I never took my eyes off the bone saw. The blade wasn't very big, but it was cutting through everything in its path like butter, and every time his eyes drifted towards me, the saw drifted towards his fingers. It was making me extremely nervous, so I tried to say something, but Rick wouldn't let me. I didn't even hear what he said after that. I just held my breath and continued watching. It's weird how long seconds feel when something like this happens. From start to finish, it was probably less than a minute, but it felt like 10 had passed from the moment he started cutting to the moment he removed the top of his left hand's index and middle fingers. In my mind's eye, the blade froze seconds before making contact with his flesh, and I tried to stop it. I lunged forward, reflexively, hoping to knock the saw aside, but there was just no time. My body couldn't move as quickly as my brain wanted, and in the same instant, the blade resumed spinning, and Rick's small, fleshy fingers appeared to explode. 1 second, the world was barely moving, and the next, it was painted red. Blood splattered all over us and the deer, while his fingertips vanished like a magic trick. Once the reality of what happened set in, our screams began at practically the same time. It's impossible to tell who actually yelled first. Rick jumped up and began cursing like a dying sailor. I've never before or since heard a man scream like that. I couldn't tell if he was laughing or crying, but it sounded like both. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the saw. It was on the floor, and the bloodied blade made it look like an actual predator. Like it had just finished a particularly satisfying meal that it was now ready to sleep off. I didn't snap out of it until Rick's good hand clasped my shoulder and spun me around. A bottle of whiskey was cradled beneath his other arm, and his eyes were wild with shock, as I'm sure mine were too. But I can't imagine what this whole thing was like from his perspective. He shook me and begged me to help him find his fingers. But he wouldn't let go. I had to pry his fingers open to free myself, and he immediately went back to his whiskey. I tried to stop him. Even then, I knew the alcohol was bad for bleeders, but he pushed me away so hard that I fell to the ground. I guess it all worked out because that's how I found his fingertips. The index finger got cut just beneath the nail, and his middle finger was taken off right at the top knuckle. As I ran out of the workshop, I noticed that he had a dirty bandana wrapped around his wound, and I wondered if there was any point to getting his fingers on ice, but it didn't slow me down. I was essentially on autopilot as I ran across his backyard and into the kitchen. I could still hear Rick cursing as I searched for a Ziploc. Eventually, I found a plastic cup with a lid and filled that instead. Since Rick still hadn't come out of the workshop, I put his fingers in the cup holder and pulled my truck around back. I thought it would be a good idea to eliminate as much walking as possible, but as I was getting out of my truck, the cursing stopped, and the sound of the bone saw took its place. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What the hell is he trying to do now? I burst through the door just in time to see blood splatter all over the wall, workbench, and floor. There was even a little on the ceiling. Rick had his back to me, so I couldn't see much else at first. I can't remember exactly what I said, but something along the lines of why or what the hell. But I'll never forget the look on his face when he turned around and proudly held up his hand. There was no sign of pain or anger. I'm not sure what emotion to call it, but it's as if he were presenting a completed project that had taken months to finish, like he was showing it off. If not for the awful sight that I still see clearly in my nightmares, you would have never guessed that there was a mangled hand under all that blood. Honestly, it didn't even really look like blood. I guess I've just never seen so much that was so fresh. But Rick answered in a tone that matched his demeanor. He very casually explained the 2 severed fingers were uneven, which he clearly found unacceptable. Since his fingers had bits of bone and whatever else was in there sticking out of it, he thought it would be best to even it all out, like it was a goddamn haircut. That's when I noticed the empty whiskey bottle on the floor. He'd managed to drink half a fifth in the amount of time it took me to bring back a cup of ice. I wasn't exactly calm and collected, but that was a very sobering moment. I began to think more clearly as I went from being very freaked out to genuinely afraid. I didn't know what that crazy bastard might try to do next, but I definitely was going to let the doctors explain why he lost any chance of reattaching his fingers. For the most part, I think I handled it as well as I possibly could have. I kept Rick calm on the way to the hospital, but I was right about his fingers. Luckily, the doctors are able to sedate people who aren't ready to hear bad news. I remember thinking the whole ordeal would finally be what got Rick to stop drinking. But he didn't. Not even for a little while, and certainly not while he was working. 6 years ago, he died in a house fire after getting drunk and passing out with a lit cigarette. In the end, I suppose we're just lucky he never hurt anyone but himself. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me tonight. Whether it's your first time or you're a regular, your support means the world over here, so thanks so much for listening. We've got brand new videos every Friday night. Keep those eyes open long enough to find those deep sleep videos, and of course, double features. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Also, don't forget to check out Halloween Horror Hour, a variety show featuring 12 Pacific Northwest-made horror shorts, local music, the history of Halloween, and more. Just think Elvira meets Pee-wee's Playhouse. A Frankenstein's monster of a variety show. It's almost alive. Oh, and did I mention you'll catch the Darkest Hour on there too? Yeah, so subscribe to Halloween Horror Hour, linked in the description, and be some of the first to witness the spooky this October 6th. Big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of my patrons whom I appreciate so very much. Tracy S, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, The Dark Cosmos, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Lissane, Arlene F, and Adrienne. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour, or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.